This is an FX3, Sony's cheapest full-frame cinema camera. And this is a Burano, Sony's latest addition to their range-topping Cine Alta line of cameras. In this video, we will find out if the Burano is actually better, if it is worth all the extra cash, and if this is the dream team of cameras. Right, so I've been out and about capturing some test footage of the FX3 and the Burano with the same lens and same settings. I've got them loaded up here in DaVinci Resolve side by side, so let's compare. First up is an AF test, and I went for middle settings on both cameras. This is the Burano here, and as you can tell, it does a fantastic job. Next up, the FX3, and again, this also does a really good job. Putting them side by side, we can see the FX3 on its middle settings does react faster, but maybe the Burano just looks a little bit more natural. I'd call this one a draw. These are very, very close, and I would not say there's a real winner here. These side by side images are quite good for testing dynamic range. We expose the camera to 99+1 on the zebras, so the sky is just under clipping, and see where both cameras fell. These are actually really close images. They look really similar. I would say there's a bit of a warm greeny tone to the FX3, and it has more saturation, but I do think I would lean in to the Burano's image. It's very close, and to say the price gap, these are two really similar looking images. Punching in 200%, what I can see here is, again, there's more saturation inside the FX3, but there is more detail and less noise inside that higher resolution image of the Burano. Dynamic range, I would probably give to the Burano just for having a little bit less noise, but they are both seen into the shadows, and I think the linear curve, with them both being S-Log free, is very similar. I would probably say this is a slight win to the Burano. Now we have an IBIS test. This was just handheld in both cameras on standard IBIS settings, and I would say that this is a win for the FX3. What I will say is the Burano is not on a shoulder, which makes it a lot more stable and kind of is built ergonomically to do that, where the FX3 is not. But overall here, the IBIS on the FX3 to me in this situation looks better. Here's a shot of a cactus, and we're going to punch in by 500% here to test detail. And again, we're noticing that the Burano at native ISO of 800 is definitely less noisy and more detailed. I would say there is more saturation, maybe a little bit more contrast in the FX3, but there is definitely a lot more detail here on the raw files inside of Resolve. Here we can compare the colours and low light. So let's start off at the native ISO of both cameras of 800, and placing them side by side, we can see again that there is an orange greeny tint to the FX3. I think the colours are being rendered much better here on the Burano, and if you look at the zoomed in chip up to the top right of each image, you can again see there is much more detail on the Burano than the FX3. Jumping up to the second base range for the Burano, but keep in mind here, this is not the second base range for the FX3. That comes at 12,800. We will get to that in just a sec. You'd expect the Burano here to have less noise, as it's just turned into its second native range, but it's surprisingly close. It does have slightly less noise, but the FX3 is doing extremely well to say it's so far above the native at this range. Again, we can see much more neutral, sharper image from the Burano. Jumping up to the second native ISO of the FX3, 12,800. The highest the Burano will go is 10,000, but comparing these images, they are both extremely good in low light. I would say none of these cameras are bad, because even at 10,000 ISO, the Burano looks pretty usable if you cleaned it up with a bit of denoiser. But this is definitely a win for the FX3. I think we all knew here that the FX3 was going to be better in low light, and it certainly is. Here I wanted to test the recovery of underexposing footage. So I purposely underexposed both cameras by around 1 or 2 stops, and then I went even further on the next test. You can see here this is a massive difference, the biggest difference of all so far. The Burano with its internal RAW codec just recovers so much better than the FX3. The information captured inside the cameras is worlds apart. Just having a play around inside the colour tab on Resolve with these two images, you can tell massively that there is more information inside the images from the Burano. So here you can see I just went even more extreme and we are talking 4, 5, maybe even 6 stops underexposed here. Both images are barely showing any detail, just a little bit of that red colour in the flower. And believe it or not, look how good the image looks here out of the Burano. To say this has been recovered from 5, 6 stops underexposed, a little bit of denoiser, that's maybe even usable. Comparing these two images really shows that I think a lot of the benefits of a Sony Burano and the Cine Alta cameras comes inside of post-production. Next up is slow motion, and as of today, this is prior to the update that has been promised for the Sony Burano, there is no full frame 120 frames per second. So you have to go into Super 35 mode, which is a bit of a bummer, but it is also in 4K, which is the resolution of the 120 full frame from the FX3. So I have a shot of this fountain here, and I think it looks really good on the Burano, regardless of it being in Super 35. Both look quite similar. It's quite hard to tell that one is full frame and one is not. I think side by side, again, you're getting better colour rendition from the Burano. You've got a bit of a green muddiness inside the FX3. I'll probably call this one a draw until the full frame comes to the Burano, but I believe when it does, I'll probably give it a win to the Burano. But as of today, the FX3 and Burano are quite similar for slow motion. One of the big things about the Burano was how high the rolling shutter was out of the camera in its 8.6K mode. I didn't do any kind of scientific test here, but I just waved both cameras around and placed them side by side. I think comparing the 8.6K to the 4K mode from the FX3, you can definitely see that the Burano is probably worse. But when you put both cameras in 4K, I would say the Burano maybe is better. So I don't know, maybe this is a win for FX3 or maybe this is a draw. So let's compare how my experience has been shooting on both of these cameras. But right before we do that, if you could subscribe to this channel, that would be absolutely amazing. Let's start off with reasons that I would pick the FX3 over the Burano. And an obvious one to start with would be travelling. The size and weight of the FX3 just makes way more sense for travel, weddings, events, festivals, anything like that. And the extra image quality and features gained on the Burano don't really make much sense in them scenarios anyways. And also for rigging work, when you remove the top handle off of the FX3 and it still keeps IBIS and autofocus, that camera is a dream for doing car mount shots or rigging in awkward places. So it probably comes at no shock and surprise to everybody, but for all the other jobs outside of those I just mentioned, I would probably take the Burano. I think the deep menus on the FX3 are probably better and easier to learn and understand than the ones on the Burano, but the Burano combines the quick menus from the FX line of FX9 and FX6 and also brings a new menu from the Venice, and the combinations of those two quick menus make this camera a lot easier to use. I did try thinking of stuff that the FX3 can do that the Burano cannot, but I couldn't really think of anything at all. So if you can think of anything other than like really good low light, then just let me know below, as I'm sure there's something I'm missing. But I did make a list of stuff about the Burano can do that the FX3 cannot. It has variable ND filter, which is obviously a big one, a proper PL mount without using third-party adapters. It has a V mount that's easily to chuck on and off without rigging up like you would have to do with an FX3. It has 2 times SDI ports, timecode in and out, and also a proper 12-volt mains power. In terms of ergonomics of shooting, I like a camera that sits on your shoulder and has an eye loop, so I would probably give that to the Burano. The FX3 is a bit of a nightmare to rig up for a shoulder mount shot, but can be done with enough parts and pieces rigged up. The FX3 body design though is really well designed and thought through. I think it is above pretty much any other mirrorless camera for capturing video. The fact that it does not have designated photo buttons and knobs and dials on the body just makes it really simple. Everything is labelled with video features, and that is definitely an advantage. I think going back to the IBIS shots that we watched earlier, the reason that the FX3 looks a little more stable is just when chest height shooting, it is a little bit more comfortable and lighter just to hold. If I was forced to pick just one camera to shoot a mixture of projects across all different types, then I think I would choose the Burano. But with how much more it costs, is that really a surprise to anybody? I've had it for around 6 months now, and if you want to find out what I really don't like about the camera, watch this video right here.